everybody, welcome to the Catholic Influencer Podcast, a conversation to help Catholic influencers like you and me go deeper and further in influencing our world for Jesus. I'm your host, Father Rob Galea.
And I'm your co-host, Danii Sullivan.
And we look forward today to talking to you about Catholic education and the influence of it. Hey, Dan.
Hey, Father Rob.
I called you Dan.
I know. I hate when people call me Dan.
But hey, Danii.
Hey, Father Robbie.
So, that's just awkward.
I know.
So today we're going to talk about Catholic education. None of us are teachers, you or I, but we both were brought up in Catholic education. So we both have had a Catholic education, and we both as well in FRG ministry work very closely with Catholic education, and has left a great impact and does leave great impact on so many people, but it doesn't have all the answers, does it? And very often when we find answers for something, we're left with even more questions than when we started off with.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so later on in this podcast, we're going to actually have a teacher who we've interviewed, who works in the Catholic education system, and we talk a little bit about the struggles and the joys of Catholic education. But there's no doubt about it that Catholic education is a big stronghold, is a big and important thing in our church. For example, I can only take country Australia. A lot of our churches don't have young people, and our young people are not stepping into the churches, but we have opportunities to outreach, to evangelize, to influence within the Catholic churches. And we have to take up every opportunity, invest and direct our hearts and direct our efforts very often to the Catholic education.
Absolutely. And here in country Victoria as well, in Australia, Catholic education is it's almost like a private school, but an affordable private school. So there's lots of non-religious people that attend these schools for the good education, and they're brought into the faith just through the witness of their teachers, through the RE classroom, through other students as well. So it is an incredible opportunity to evangelize, from teachers to students to all manner of staff. And then, each school has a chaplain as well. So they might come into it for one reason, but there's so many opportunities within that Catholic education to evangelize.
Yes, so it's quite different if you take the American context. American context, it's the parish that funds the school, and it's the parish that evangelizes the school. And in some schools in America, you have only Catholics in schools. While for us, it's very different. Our Catholic population is a minority. It is government funded. Even teachers and staff who teach religious education, RE, are often not Catholic themselves. And so it's really hard to influence, especially influence in a sense of encounter, having had the experience of faith themselves. As we'll go through and we talk about in the interview, it's about faith being caught. It's contagious. It's not taught. You can't teach the faith, but when people see the faith that you have, then they want it. And this is somehow what our Catholic education sometimes lacks, and I suppose even in the United States.
Yeah, absolutely. Like high school especially, I had RE teachers, and they might not have wanted to share their faith as much, or they might just be doing it to fill up their timetable, they needed to. But in year 10, I had an RE teacher who was amazing. He was actually excited about his faith, and he shared that openly. He wasn't ashamed of it. And that kind of gave me the courage to be like, okay, maybe I can share mine as well. And then in year 11 and 12, I was blessed again to have, teachers that were proudly practicing Catholics. And that just influenced me so much, because I saw that it was okay to kind of continue this faith thing even after I finished year 12.
Yeah. And it was the same for me as well. I remember his name was Mr. Joe. I had Mr. Joe, who gave me my first Christian CD, my first Christian music.
Who was it?
I think it was a band called PFR. I don't think they exist anymore, but it was a rock band. It was a Christian rock band. And I just couldn't believe that Christian music could be like that. And that sort of triggered in me. This was even before my conversion. This was before I had my turnaround in my life. And I somehow I knew that this Christian music existed because of a teacher. And I also remember even in primary school, in elementary school, I just remember these teachers that were just so full of joy and so full of faith. And they would tell stories of their faith. Crickets.
That's something Father Rob does every time I'm supposed to talk and I forget to talk. He just looks at me and waits.
So one of the things that a Catholic education differs from any other education is that we have the freedom, in a sense, to express our faith. We have the freedom to reach out to the community in a particular way. And there are often, I see this in Catholic schools, just opportunity after opportunity to reach out, not only within the school, but also outside of the school.
Yeah, absolutely. I know at my school, so I went to Notre Dame College in Shepparton. It was a great school, and we had opportunities, things like Raymar. We were a Marist and Mercy school. So Raymar was the Marist component, where it was, weekly meetings, and you'd go with a group. It was from year 9 to year 12, and you'd go outside of the school and do community activities. And then the Mercy side was a thing called Seeds of Justice. So you'd go out and do justice activities in the community. And our school also did these year 10 immersion trips. So there was, in my time, there was 3 offered. So it was Fiji, East Timor and Broome, which is a small Indigenous community here in Australia. And you'd go to these communities, you'd step away and just immerse yourself in their culture, in their life, and learn so much from that.
Yes, so it's that's very much part of our Catholic ethos, very much part of reaching out, of charity. And I think, again, this is where Catholic schools stand out, that sense of justice, reaching out to the community, but not only our immediate community, but communities around the world. And at the same time, also giving us something out of that, understanding, teaching us that the world is not us, that it's so much bigger. But also at the same time, there's that to be the devil's advocate again, that it becomes about the justice and we forget why we're doing it and who we're doing this for. And so how important it is as well to come back to that encounter, that relationship with Jesus. And the reason why we do what we do is because we have this relationship with Jesus. And it's so hard again for staff, for people who don't have this encounter with Jesus to bring about that understanding that it is, at the end of the day, Catholic schools are about our faith and reaching out to the community, bringing our faith to the community, to the wider world.
When you have a teacher that's passionate, it has that lasting impact on you. But if you walk into a religious education class and your teacher's there and they haven't had that encounter with Jesus, it's obvious. Teenagers pick up on so much. And if the teacher isn't excited, it's really hard to get the students excited about something that they aren't passionate about already. So yeah, Catholic education does, when a teacher's had that encounter, Catholic education has the potential to influence so many people.
With this, as we continue to talk about the influence of Catholic education, the influence of teachers, the impact that teachers can have on our lives, I'm going to hand over now to the next part of this podcast, and that is the interview with Kylie Morrisey. Kylie is a teacher here in Bendigo, Australia, and she'll talk a little bit about her faith and about sharing her faith, and also the joys and the difficulties of living out her faith in a Catholic school. So we're back here in our Bendigo office in the studio, and I have with me a local teacher who is actually an REC, for those who don't know what an REC. I don't even know. Is that your title, REC?
No, it's not.
What's your title?
My title is Faith and Ministry Advisor.
Faith and Ministry Advisor. Okay, so that's easy. That's something that everyone can understand. But with me I have Kylie Morrisey. Kylie's a teacher, a woman of faith, a woman also who continues to grow and seek to grow in her faith. And so Kylie, I'll let you introduce yourself quickly, just something about you.
Well, first of all, thanks for having me, Rob. You might not know, I've been teaching, this is my 7th year now. And in that time, I've been really lucky to have a whole range of travel experiences overseas, some of those connected to my faith, to, I guess, church history and things like that. But I've also had some really other extraordinary experiences overseas that I think I've made for a pretty interesting life so far.
That's good. And one of the trips, actually, I saw you in Chicago, and we both were studying. Actually, maybe you were studying. I was just sitting.
It was great fun, wasn't it?
It was fun. It was fun. We even saw a shooting there, but we won't tell anyone.
No, we won't talk about that. That wasn't a highlight.
No, it wasn't. But it's something I probably will remember.
Yeah.
But Kylie, I just want to talk to you about teaching. You call yourself, in your institution, your school, you call yourself an educator.
That's right.
So, but educators also is the same as a teacher, but you probably have reasons to say that it is is not the same, but let's say for the sake of the podcast.
Sounds great.
Okay. And, you teach in a Catholic school and you have, your faith brought up as a Catholic. I'm just going to quickly ask, why teaching and why teaching in a Catholic school? Why didn't you go to a state school? Why didn't you go to a private school?
Yeah, I really love the opportunity to answer that question because it goes back to my childhood and my experience with my family. And I guess I grew up in a Catholic home where religious practice, going to church on Sundays, was a part of what we did. And I never began to question that. I went to a Catholic primary school, but then did 3 years in a secondary state school and then transferred at the end of year 9. So when I was about 15 years old, and then had 3 incredible years of Catholic education here in Bendigo. And that was a real catalyst, I think, for my discernment for my career pathway, which I had lots of different ideas around what kind of career I might enter into. But after a really successful year 12 and some really exciting religious education in that year, which might surprise some of our listeners, I decided that I'd go on to become a teacher. I'd had some excellent teachers, particularly in those last 3 years. And so I decided to become a teacher. And I guess it all sort of snowballed from there in a really great way.
Wow. And so now your role is particularly religious education, faith education. It's also about instilling the faith. And I've worked with you in the school because I'm not a chaplain at the school, but I serve as a chaplain in the school. And I've seen some of your amazing work reaching out to young people from masses in the playground. Go on, imagine that. So this is the way we outreach and let in public display. It's an optional mass that students can go to, and then you we run liturgies and you help with so many things, sharing your faith. And so, like, being in a Catholic school, a Catholic institution, how do you think that it helps the faith of the students? And what are the opportunities of being and serving in a Catholic school?
Yeah, sure. So if I go back to my own experience as a student, I can, 2 of the biggest influences, I guess, on my Catholic faith life were my 2 year 12 VCE religious education teachers. I had 2 extraordinarily different but incredible women who were great models of their own personal faiths to me, which really just gave me the courage, I guess, to pursue a career as a religious education teacher. And now I guess I see a lot of myself I see a lot of them in the work that I'm doing. And it's really great to reflect on, those same questions that I was asking of my religious education teachers back in 2007. They're the same questions that my students are now asking of me. And so to have been able to go away and to have studied and to have some of the answers, certainly not all of them, but to recognise the privilege that it is to walk with young people, I guess, as they're moving through some of the tricky times of their lives. I think that's certainly when, you might find that some students come, they need you more in those phases, but it's also a really great opportunity just, to help them recognise the joys and where God may be at playing a role in their lives that perhaps they're not as conscious of.
Yeah, and I think this is it comes down to encounter and walking with. You use the words to walk with.
Yeah.
You see, one of the things that I often say and I often hear is that faith is caught, not taught. Through education, you cannot give them the faith, but they can see the faith in you, and once they see the faith in you, they want what you have.
That's right, yeah, and I think that that's probably one of the most important things that I do at the start of each year is whenever I have a new RE classroom of students sitting in front of me, I think the most important thing I can share with them for the whole year is that story of why I'm here, why I'm teaching RE, why I believe. And I think it's also really important to be compassionate, to understand that some students don't walk through that door with the big bag full of faith that perhaps I do, but they tend to, I think, relate to that. They do understand. I don't find that they judge me for that.
Yeah.
But I think that that's a really powerful thing to be able to share, to be able to witness to your own faith, to say, here I am, I'm here teaching RE because this is something that I believe in. It's not just another class that was allocated to me by my deputy principal. I think that's really powerful for your students sitting in front of you.
So they see the conviction, they see the fact that you actually believe.
Yeah.
Because again, working even in Catholic schools, some of our youth in our groups would come up to us and say, "Hey, Father Rob, we just had an RE lesson on the Eucharist, and the teacher started off the lesson saying, 'Hey, I don't believe this rubbish, but I'm going to teach this to you.'"
Yeah.
But what a difference it would make if someone would say, like, "Hey, I actually believe in the Eucharist. I actually receive the Eucharist. I actually follow the Eucharist. The Eucharist is the source and the summit of my life.
Yeah.
So it becomes about encounter. It comes about walking with, as opposed to the didactic sort of I'm teaching you about the Eucharist.
Yeah, I think there's a real power in that. But that's not to say that it's, I think it's very okay to share with students your doubts and your own questioning.
Absolutely.
I think that's also something that they really relate to. And then they see that, faith life might be achievable for them too.
Yes.
Sometimes I think they associate, being of faith with having, those striking moments where Jesus speaks to them. And for many of us, we never get that. And that's not to say that Jesus isn't present in our lives. It's just occurring perhaps in different ways. So I think, giving students the confidence and to be able to articulate what it is that they're thinking. And
and because like doubts, we all go through doubts. I go through doubts.
Absolutely.
I even say it in my homilies. Like I'm sure I go through moments where I don't know what I believe. At the moment in Australia, America, we're going through an incredible crisis. There's a situation where one of our cardinal is is in jail at the moment, and so the whole Catholic Australia and the world, and it's happened in America as well, are in doubt. We're questioning, and I have, in my homily last week, I cried, just thinking what's going on, and we have our doubts, and it's important for students, for parishioners as well, but students to see our vulnerability too, isn't it?
Yeah, I agree. I think it's a very confusing time to be a Catholic at the moment, and I think sharing that with our students can only have a positive outcome.
And so them knowing that we're struggling with them, that we have doubts, but at the end of the day, we have a hope that we believe in Jesus.
That's
you
right.
see, and that's the most important thing, that we're holding on to Jesus and his body, the church, as imperfect, as broken as it is. So this brings me to this also, the difficulties. Like, how can you live your faith? It's a Catholic school, but in Australia, schools are funded by the government. So a lot of our staff and a lot of our students are not Catholic. They don't have the Catholic faith. And even students themselves tell me how difficult they find it to live out their faith in a Catholic school, and how they're bullied at school for practicing their faith. And I even hear it from teachers. Some teachers find it really hard to practice their faith. So tell me about your experience in school, about living out your faith.
Yeah, well, if I go back to my own experience as a student, particularly in 2007. So that was when I was in year 12, so 17 years old. And I undertook 2 year 12 religious education subjects, which just was not cool, I think. I don't know of anyone else to do that. And yet it was the most rich learning experience, and obviously a really massive catalyst for my own personal growth. But I guess that year really challenged me to reflect on what it was that I believed and why I was doing what I was doing, even as a 17-year-old. And I guess it just was a really great time of coming to terms with my identity and things like that. So it made me, I think, far stronger. I had to stick up for what it was that I believed in. And so that bit of personal challenge it really has brought me to where I am today, and trying to encourage other young people to do the same. So it certainly wasn't cool.
Yeah.
You can probably imagine some of the names and the stereotypes that went along with that. And yet from that experience, I gained my future career. I gained some really wonderful friends, lost some other friends because of that choice, or the choices that I made as a consequence of that growth. But I think that I'm a better person for it in the long run, and would hope that today, and working as a teacher, that I have the capacity to help another young person in that same sort of way. So,
and what about staff? Like, among the staff, how easy is it for a teacher who has faith to work among other staff members who don't necessarily have that faith?
Well, I think that there's our faith, our Catholic faith, is evangelical by nature, so we're called to share that. And there's a real joy, but also a real challenge in that, because it can be met with some resistance. And you might anticipate in a Catholic school setting that everyone would be on the same page, and yet we know that there's some issues that are really divisive within the church. And these, a school is a reflection of a church, so that can be can be challenging and problematic. I think it's most important that, when schools employ staff, that the number one position or key selection criteria is a demonstrated commitment to the Catholic ethos of the school. And I think if staff can't satisfy that might be a little bit problematic down the track.
Yes.
So I guess it's just the expectation of staff is the same as we have of students and families enrolling at our schools, and that is that they demonstrate an openness.
Yeah.
I think our staff do understand that, by working in a Catholic school, they're working for the Catholic Church, and therefore it's the teachings of the Catholic Church that need to be shared. Sometimes I think, personal opinions aren't always relevant, but the Catholic, the teaching of the Catholic Church always is. And I think that the ability of a staff member to unpack that with their class about why does the Catholic Church teach what it does, I think that's so critical, because there's so many misconceptions and misunderstandings that lead to so much angst and hurt.
So it's educating as well, trying to figure out how it's okay to doubt, it's okay not to agree, but at the end of the day, don't stop in your doubt, don't stop in your disagreement, just figure out why. Yeah,
and don't stop in your questioning. If you're unsure or if you're uncomfortable with someone, and I think particularly in my school setting, there's we have a really respectful dialogue around some of those issues, and we're really invited to have those conversations, and I think that enables everyone to grow, and that can only be a good thing.
Yeah. So this is it's interesting, and I'm sure I'd love to hear from the listeners about how your situation is different in the United States, in Canada, in India, all of these places. Actually, even in Malta, we have a lot of listeners from Malta. I wonder why that is, but just be curious to know how the situation is different to what Kylie is saying here. Is there dialogue in your school, or do you have to think one way and speak one way, or at the end of the day, are you open to discussion in the school? Anyway, Kylie, I think we've reached the end of our time together. I just want to quickly, if you could give us some advice to educators, advice to teachers who want to be a brave influence of the truth of Christ at school. Maybe you can even bring it to students as well. Just what's the thing that is important for them to understand, to know, and to do, to be an influencer, a Catholic influencer in a Catholic school?
Yeah, I think, I think the phrase that comes to my mind is just be authentic, be yourself, be real with the kids. I think they relate most to, people that they can trust, they can see through the lies or the facade, if you like, at times. So I think just being open and honest with them in a respectful way to the mission of your college and the mission of the church, I think is really important, and trust that God will do the rest.
Amen. So this is beautiful. This is wonderful. So anyway, Kylie, I thank you so much for your time here. I thank you for speaking to us so openly and so authentically as well. And we'll pray for you. We'll pray for your mission, and we ask the listeners to do the same, to pray for you in your work.
Thanks,
God
Rob.
bless you, and thank you.
Thanks very much.
Thank you so much for joining us today on the Catholic Influencers Podcast. Remember to be in touch at frgministry.com/podcast or any of our social medias. So Facebook, Instagram and Twitter at FRG Ministry. Send us your questions and your thoughts, and we'll be back next week. God bless.